Here's the agenda of what we're going to talk about. There's going to be some topical overlap with the previous purple team talk. So we're going to go over the typical genesis of software security, the anatomy of a breach, and some SSA foundations and practices. So my name is Diebel. I am the manager of application security at the Denim Group, a consultancy based out of San Antonio and here in Austin. Our Austin office is actually just across the street. So we work with a variety, I've been doing this for over 11 years, and we work with a variety of technologies, industries, doing assessments, helping people develop their own programs, helping people onboard tools, integrate security into their SDLC, et cetera. So we're going to be focusing on software security, but we're software security people, so I'm not going to dwell on that. So let's go ahead and talk about some SSA pitfalls. So, and I talk about these pitfalls because this is something that we see in the wild all the time. So suppose we have executive leadership, not necessarily technology people, but decision makers, that have drank the Kool-Aid. They are on board with doing application security. They must implement it because of, and it could be for whatever reasons, incidents, regulations, diligence or caution, ideally a combination of multiple ones. So being executives, they have an immediate decision to make. Well, who are they going to make responsible for this? They could potentially pull somebody out of development, but these people don't have any process for security testing, no security training, no time, and well, there's a conflict of interest. These are not necessarily security folks, and so. And we also don't want people just doing security tests of their own stuff. So it makes more sense at the time to pull somebody out of IT. IT has security, so clearly our application security person should also come from IT. I think we here in the room know that this is not a terribly wise decision, but to executive leadership, these are the options they're weighing, and so this is a decision that makes sense for them. So down comes the mandate to IT. All right. We need to do some AppSec, so you are responsible for this. All right. So IT receives this and says, great, well, let's appoint somebody, I guess we'll name him Bob or something, to be the AppSec lead. You are now in charge of application security. Now, this person is not necessarily a dumb person. This is probably someone who's very capable. And this person does understand security. They understand protocols and transport layers and certifications and hardening a perimeter and things like these. These people get security, but may not have a development background. So now the AppSec lead does understand that there is a knowledge gap, and so they need to kind of figure out how to do their job. So somebody appointed from IT security needs to get started. What is some place they may turn to in order to learn what to do? OWASP, conferences. We see these people show up at conferences all the time. And who's going to talk to them when they go to a conference? Yes, vendors, right? Now, of course, we have vendors here, of course, and those are good tools, and we have used or currently use a lot of that stuff. But of course, the fundamental problem here is that the first person that this IT security person is talking to is someone who's trying to sell them something. Now, this could be a good product, but this is being procured by someone who is not necessarily capable of understanding all the risks that come with implementing this and all the work that comes with using this properly. All right. So now our AppSec lead has his tools. They could be a static analysis tool, live testing tool, combination of both. And so that AppSec lead is going to retrieve something that they need to test. Could be source code, maybe they have repository access, maybe they ask for the source code, or a QA runway. That, those things make sense to test. And they're going to go ahead and run that scan, and now they have this nice set of scan results. By the way, who hasn't really been involved in this process yet, and who doesn't really necessarily know what's going on that probably should know? Yeah, developers. Guess what's about to happen to them? Oh, they're about to find out really soon what's going on, right? Right. Looking at it from this perspective, we can see that this is a disaster waiting to happen. But this is a sequence of decisions that made sense at the time those decisions were made, and so here we are. The AppSec lead gets those scan results, and what's he going to do with them? Hey, developers. Hey, suckers. I got something for you. I now have extra work, half of which might not actually be valid problems. Your schedule is what? I don't know. So, so what do you think is the developer's reaction? I can't put a middle finger on a slide, so I'm going to have to just resort to a frowny face. Developers, hey, fix these. Developers say, what am I supposed to do with this? What's your name? This is how a AppSec program typically starts out. This is what happens when you have a series of decisions that make sense at the time, but culminate into a situation where you're actually further behind than you were when you started. Avoid these pitfalls to bring ruin, confusion, and strife into the developer's life. So clearly we have our little developers here. Here's our security, and I like to think of these little bombs as PDFs of security vulnerabilities. So here you go, sucker. Bleep you. Read this thing because I don't want to read it. And I'm sure that's all things you need to fix. So this is a sneak attack. It's going to, when a developer sees a scan results with 1 or 2 or 3 false positives, what are they going to do? What are they going to do with that set of results? All right. This whole thing is garbage. I'm not going to do anything. And so now this enterprise is actually further behind what it was than it was when they were doing nothing. Now there is a poisoned relationship between security and the devs. This is a situation of pushing mandates the staff are not prepared to handle. So the typical genesis of app security in these scenarios we reviewed have a couple things in common. The individual decisions made sense from some perspective and for the person making those decisions. But a formal SSA program and a proper start can avoid these pitfalls. So before we get into some foundations, let's go ahead and look at a not too long ago breach and some of the failures that went into it and which of those failures could have been addressed by an SSA program. Target. Let's talk about Target. Who here has some familiarity with how the Target breach happened? Some of the things involved. All right, so about half, maybe a little bit less familiar. I'm not gonna dwell on what every little exploit was, but the general gist of it is we had. You hear the attackers. Here's the contractor that was initially compromised, down to a contractor portal, partner-to-partner system. And then down further into Target's corporate network all the way to point of sale. So let's look at what happened. First thing they did, well, as many talks already in this conference have asserted, attackers are going to want to try to get credentials first, right? They're not going to try anything sophisticated if something simple is going to work. In this case, simple being, let's go after one of those mom and pop HVAC contractors, get keyloggers on their machine so we can get some credentials. So the attackers use Citadel and a building contractor, harvest keystrokes, get their password to their contractor portal. The contractor could have mitigated this risk, but as Target, there are a few things you can do about this. There are ways you can use like applets to check and see if there's any malware running. There are solutions for that, but really Target should be just presupposing that this is going to happen. Now, in the contractor portal, there was an application vulnerable to a malicious PHP uploads. The attackers uploaded a PHP file called XML RPC. RPC stands for? Right, so anybody who saw this file name should have had smoke blowing out of their ears when they saw that on the server, right? This is something that was this is not even remotely subtle, right? Somebody threw up a remote shell on there. From there, they started querying LDAP. Should this system had access to LDAP? No, there was no reason for that, but it did. That's where they were. So they did install network monitoring tools. They did extract NTLM hashes, and so they found someone else's domain admin account and made their own, so they could have their little playground from there forward. So with the domain admin count, they started scanning for anything network accessible from this contractor portal. They found other services, they found other vulnerabilities, and they set up a little file server on the inside. Now you see in the middle here, there's a little thing called a FireEye. That was actually a proxy network designed to detect malicious activity, and it totally worked. It actually caught this activity. The FireEye did detect suspicious activity, but the InfoSec staff deactivated the automatic malware removal and neglected the warnings. The logging system was really noisy and really messy, and so they started turning stuff off. I think 2 talks ago about the logging, the gentleman from in the main room there was talking about this kind of risk. If you don't have a proper way of sorting through the noise, people are tempted to start doing dumb stuff like this. For some reason, the point of sale systems were accessible from within the corporate domain. A lot of the corporate clients we work with, this is an absolute cardinal sin. You don't connect corporate to your point of sale. And this is one reason you don't do that. So they put malware on the POS systems, specifically the registers. And of course, they scraped all the payment card. They scraped every card swipe, loaded up on the file server, and they actually were able to just toss it outside to an FTP server that they owned. The failures here are almost too numerous to count. Why did the firewall allow an outbound connection from an unknown file server to unknown locations? Why did the firewall allow FTP at all? Why didn't the perimeter find the movement of PCI? If they had done any of these things, they might not have completely prevented it, but at least they would have had some early detection. So we can't create a complete list of failures here because it would be the rest of this talk. But there were general areas of failures. The application, there was an obscure but highly vulnerable PHP application. On the network, there was far too much connectivity from the contractor portal to the corporate domain to point of sale. These are 3 things that should not have been able to talk to each other in the way they did. Poor perimeter control. They were able to just move PCI over clear text outside the perimeter to their own FTP. This is maddening. And operationally, they had poor scrutiny of the fire intrusion alerts and poor scrutiny of Active Directory. There was an additional account created that shouldn't have been there. Even some minimal operational processes to verify the integrity of the AD could have caught what was going on. This exploit was a slow burn over a very long period of time. They had lots of time to do any of these things to prevent this. But how could an SSA program have prevented this? Well, a comprehensive risk-ranked application portfolio could have ensured security review and testing for the PHP service. Do we all know how PHP malicious file upload works? Right? You put source code up on a PHP file, it just runs because it doesn't have any central manifest of what your source archives are. I mean, that's the kind of vulnerability that somebody with a semester of AppSec, a college student with a semester of AppSec under their belt could have caught this. They could have caught this quickly. Their failure was not necessarily that they checked it and missed it. The failure was that they never even thought to check this. Threat modeling could have prompted the portal architects to minimize privileges into the corporate domain, among other mitigating controls. Right? There are lots of network failures, but there is threat modeling that could have detected this. Numerous other failures were outside the scope of SSA, but the breach into target did start with the web service. This did start with that PHP server that allowed them to get a web root and then work their way further in. So this did start with apps. Here's the thing. Application security is different. It's different from quality assurance. It integrates with the SDLC in similar places. The last talk about Purple Team was about integrating security into the SDLC. Just like QA, it's not something you wait until the end. I think we understand that. But the goals and competencies required to do that successfully are very different. As far as InfoSec, we are looking for this. We have the similar goals as InfoSec people, but the processes to handle this problem properly are very fundamentally different. So there is wisdom to gain from mature QA or InfoSec program, but they cannot lay out a complete solution in front of us. Application security is its own thing. So how should an enterprise manage this kind of application risk? Suppose we're in an enterprise that has a combination of active development, lots of legacy applications. There are lots of things we could be doing. We talk about scanning tools, performing assessments, integrating security into the SDLC, change management, getting the budget for all these things, making decisions on tools. How can we kind of sort out all the things we could be doing? So here we have a gross oversimplification of some of the roles within an enterprise. So executive leadership, the C-level decision makers, security leadership, the security experts who are responsible for getting some of this security stuff done, development and production ops. So development obviously must adopt secure design, coding, and testing. The production ops people must monitor production systems, maintain a hardened environment, and respond to incidents. Makes it sound easy, but as we know, it is quite not easy. But executive leadership must provide the motive and means that make the program possible. Very important. And security leadership must address immediate risk by assessing production and managing known vulnerabilities. And they must also provide guidance and metrics that tie all of these other practices together. Theirs is the biggest job, obviously. So a security program can bring these practices together. These are just groups of practices. This obviously isn't a complete list. Complete list doesn't fit on a single slide. And so there are ways that we can slice this out. However, a program is not easily adopted. Executives have to worry about getting the budget and justifying the budget that they're allocating. They can't just say, it's not good enough to just say, I need to throw money at security because security is good, because half the board is going to treat security as overhead to be minimized. Security leadership is going to have difficulty juggling a large application portfolio, figuring out what's worth the limited time and resources. Development also, out of the gate, they're not ready to adopt this yet. And production ops, they may not even know what application security risks even look like and how it's different from what they normally deal with day to day. These are people who deal with attacks regularly, but they don't know how to recognize application attacks. So when challenges come, excuses soon follow. These are all quotes we've heard over the years. We aren't a security company. Our audit said we're in compliance. Attackers won't bother with this. Well, we haven't been compromised yet. Really, why worry now? So the case for an SSA program, as big a problem as this is, the situation doesn't have to be confusing and overwhelming. Iterative, measurable progress within a comprehensive plan can help an enterprise mature while keeping positive. So here's some key elements of an SSA program. SSA, again, software security assurance. It accounts for the possibility of space of SSA activities. We want our program to put in front of us all the things we could be doing and how mature those things could be. And it's not just in development, it's also in legal, testing, maintenance, ops. It's okay if you don't do everything right now, but a program cannot grow if you don't acknowledge what you're doing and what you aren't doing but could be doing. The goals are clear and well known. We need leadership to be on board with what we're doing and to have a mandate down to the entire enterprise. This is what we're doing and why. It clearly defines the activities, what they are, why we do it, who's responsible, and most importantly, it is actionable and responsible parties are accountable for success. It's the old, there's an old African proverb, the goat owned in common always starves. If a committee is responsible for anything, then nobody's really responsible and nothing will get done. So a program needs to clearly define what those responsibilities are. So where do we start? Well, we can't go on the warpath and say, all right, you're in charge of code review, you're in charge of live testing, you're in charge of vulnerability management, you're in charge of receiving bug bounty fines and managing the bug bounty program. Before we start doling those things out, we need to, and holding the staff accountable, we need to make sure that they're actually prepared to do this. We need to make sure that the enterprise understands the nature and scope of the problem, ensures that the staff understand their roles in the program, and of course enable them to succeed. Starting out, leaders should understand the problem and address the most immediate risks. Let's not go choking people out for their mistakes if we haven't properly prepared them. That's one excuse to put that up on a slide. All right. So where do we start? You know, if you ask around your enterprise, you're going to get lots of different opinions on how you should start out. If your organization is starting from scratch, developers will suggest changing the SDLC. Network architects will suggest hardening the perimeter. Testers will suggest running assessments, and executives will suggest operational and deployment process. The things that these suggestions have in common is that this is people leaning on what they already know. Right? They're not necessarily making decisions based on what needs to happen first. They're making that decision based on, okay, what am I least likely to mess up right now? Much like a cat will try to solve every problem with teeth and claws, people will lean back on what they know. So we don't want to do things prematurely. So before we let's get a full program, let's get a whole framework going, let's talk about some foundations. Let's build some needed foundations. We want to build some foundations because we want to address the most immediate risks in the short term, focus on practices that complement one another actually, and give your staff the intel and capability to succeed. Typical enterprise, your company, what's the most pressing application security problem? Not a trick question. Do what? Right. Well, yeah. What problems am I sitting on right now? Right. That's your most pressing immediate problem wherever you are. That's the most first concern. So why not? Why don't we start with that? Let's look at what potential risks I'm sitting on right now, and let's fully address those first. I'll elaborate on these in a bit. So find and fix. Once you have shown that you're capable of finding and fixing, educate your developers, your ops, your leaders, your architects. Scope out the program. Let's get a hold of what our goals are and how big this program is going to have to be. And then finally, tie those all together into your mission. Whether it be for the next year or whether it be multiple years out. Then we tie all those things together. So let's start with finding and fixing. For most organizations, assessing applications first is better short-term and long-term. Now, and I bring up this point because a lot of times we come into enterprises, we come into teams that may make the decision. They may have a mix of legacy applications and active development, and they make the decision, well, I'm going to change the SDLC first because that's our new development. Those are going to be some important applications, and vulnerabilities are much cheaper to fix if I'm doing an early development. Those things are all true, but what are some drawbacks to that line of reasoning? If you start changing up the DevOps and how they do their day-to-day, if you're going to come in with changes on how they do their day-to-day business, what are those developers going to demand of you? Leave or explain yourself, right? The problem with going straight into the SDLC, and we do see this, like we'll go in and we'll look and see, oh, hey, you just started assessing applications, but you've had coding standards for 2 years, and we go look at them, and they got like the OWASP SCP, and they threw it up on their SharePoint portal, and none of the devs know it exists. Nobody looks at it because they haven't had a reason to care that it's even there, right? Because here's the thing. In a program, if you have to kind of dig through some obscure portal or dig out of your filing cabinet to get the piece of paper, is it a working policy? No, it's not. It doesn't count. So for most organizations, assessing apps is better in the short term and the long term. Assessing your apps first can expose exploitable flaws in your high-value production apps. That is obviously very important. Provide real data to validate the need for security to leadership. And testers and operations team can see what vulnerabilities and exploits look like in their environment. It's one thing to just give general teaching and show them why application security is cool and why the exploits look cool. It's another thing to kind of show them, okay, here's the general exploit, and and by the way, I looked at your application. Here's injection in your application. here's a phishing off of your application. The last training I did, I actually, it was for a company in Nevada. I was doing all this training, and I was, as I was showing the individual vulnerabilities, I was pulling up this one team's architecture documentation and kind of showing them all how the vulnerabilities applied to their environment. There was like 4 or 5 teams in there. The next day he was like, was I the only guy who gave you my architecture documentation? Because you're picking on me a lot. And I was like, yeah, sorry. You did a good job of providing information. I had to punish you by embarrassing you in front of everybody. So, but we want to know what these vulnerabilities look like, because that goes towards the end of understanding what are our most immediate problems. If your vulnerabilities are just a handful of like tiny little oversights in your encoding, and so maybe there's like one cross-site scripting, but it's not everywhere, then maybe you just need to do some assessments from time to time. But if I start seeing broad swaths of like no access control, you use your Node.js to kind of determine what role somebody is when they access your services. Well, those are signs of deep-seated lack of knowledge in your developers and your architects. And so now you understand what's more important. So there's a lot of intel you're going to get from just running some assessments first. So how to do this: identify your top 2 to 5 apps. It's an informal process. Everybody knows what their top 2 to 5 applications are. We don't need to get formal with our application risk rating yet. Discover vulnerabilities, communicate the findings, and verify remediation. Well, you're going to want to know, can this process work end to end at all? You're going to want to know, well, are they going to ignore your request for fixes? When you send them something to fix, are they just going to respond in middle fingers? Or are they actually going to fix it? Are they going to fix it and be salty about it? What's going on? Do they care? Because whether or not they care is going to determine whether or not you need to bring some sort of authoritarian mandate into the picture. You don't want to have to do that. You want everybody to be on board and just make it happen. But we've seen all kinds. We've been to very large enterprises where you don't actually need to have an executive mandate to fix things, because the culture is such that they will get it done. All you have to do is show them what the problem is, make sure they understand it, and developers are smart people. They can figure out fixes with a little bit of help. Will they contest the findings with assumptions outside their domain? Are they going to say, well, yeah, but nobody's going to exploit this because there's a VPN connection? Well, if a developer says that, well, the controls on the connection to your services are not your business. You need to assume that that's been compromised. And if you have to have that conversation, then this is intel you need right now if you have to have those kinds of conversations. Will they implement incorrect fixes without consulting somebody with appropriate expertise? That's another piece of information we want to know. Do they know who they can turn to? Going through this process is going to teach us that. If the process doesn't work, you have other problems to solve before you can move forward. So this is one thing to make sure you have in order before you move on. So with this foundation, you've got knowledge of and fixes for your highest profile vulnerabilities, real data to validate the need for secure dev and to inform training, and insight into the nature of your flaws and how developers address them. All good stuff. So you have assessments. What next? Developers must understand the importance and nature of functional application security. With assessments in hand, you can strengthen your training with real data, like I just talked about. It's one thing to teach them about vulnerabilities. It's another to teach them about vulnerabilities and then pull up their source code in front of them and show them, give them a reason to care. Developers, again, they're going to get your training. They're going to understand. You just have to give them a reason to care. Security awareness training is not enough. What topics should I cover in our domain application security training? I bring this up because one common pitfall we see is, well, I'm going to teach the OWASP top 10. Is the OWASP top 10 a cool, wonderful thing? Yes. Is the OWASP top 10 appropriate for a standard? No, why not? It's just top 10. It's a list of fun facts, right? It's a list of what are some interesting common vulnerabilities. The whole point of the OWASP top 10 is to get people interested and get people to care, and it works. It totally serves that purpose. The problem is we get people who take the next step and start building their standards off of it. They start, setting their code scan filters based on the OAuth top 10. They start using it as a baseline for their actual functional security because that's all they've been able to wrap their hands around. But what you should be doing is your full set of functional application security requirements. And OWASP, again, this is not my list. This is OWASP. They put that in front of you. Some other training pitfalls. I think the last session with the purple team made this very same point. Because we run into this from time to time. I just want my developers to write secure code, not know how to attack applications. That's a waste of time. I don't want them hacking my stuff. I just want them to know what the secure code is supposed to look like. What's the drawback of that? Why is it good to teach developers we work with like how to attack your stuff? There's wisdom in that. What are the benefits of that?
Understand the purpose of fixing it. Fix flaws before.
Yeah, like first you want them to understand why these things are problems, and you want that knowledge and the wisdom they get from that training to translate to other domains. You don't want to teach them something that goes away the very moment they change platforms or frameworks or write a new kind of app or go from web to mobile, right? You want them to understand what risk really is, what it looks like, get them a little scared, let them see that actually attacking applications is not that difficult. The strength that we bring into this situation as app security professionals is our experience and our like mindset that we take when we approach these applications and the ability to manage the complexity that comes with assessing an application. That's what we bring to it. It's not that the attacks we do are just beyond their depth. That's not the case. Developers are smart people. They'll get it if we give them a compelling reason to. And so it is in our best interest to teach them what attackers do and to make them comfortable with attacking things so that they can really appreciate the situation that they are in as developers. Standards and guidance. Different teams will need suitable standards and subject matter experts. So the people that do the coding, the architecture, and the deployment ops are going to need their own standards. But however you do it, there is some essential content you're going to need in your standards. So solutions for functional security requirements. What are functional security requirements? These guys, these are functional security requirements, right? What do you do for authentication? That's a functional security requirement. What do you do for your outputting, coding, escaping, validation? Those are all functional security requirements. So your standard should have solutions for those things. Code configuration and other implementation to avoid, right? Because that's actionable. A blacklist is not always the best thing, but you do want a blacklist of some sort. References to shared solutions and other supporting material. Here is what this enterprise does to solve this problem. This may work for you, so let's put it in front of you. So OWASP does provide useful places to start building your own standards. That's what we do when we help somebody build their own coding standards. Is we're very transparent about the process. Just go to the SCP Quick Reference Guide. That was, again, built by very smart OWASP people. Filter it out to make sure that the technology is relevant to them. Tune it to make it appropriate for the platforms they develop in, and then work from there. Some people will want you to like have a letter of attestation to it and a sign-off under threat of death if you don't verify adherence. Other people just use it as a cool guide, but OWASP already gives us the things that we need to make sure that we have enough breadth of coverage in our standards. So let's use it. Some other pitfalls. Do your developers have reason to turn to your secure development resources? If you just put it out there and tell them it's a cool thing, don't expect anybody to actually read it. If a standard has no mandate, it isn't really a standard. If it isn't informed and appropriate for the target team, it becomes impossible to mandate, right? We want to make sure that we give them something that they have a reason to use and that they're actually capable of using. If we give them just the if we just give them the Secure Coding Practices Guide raw, they're not going to know what to do with it, especially somebody who's fresh out of school. Again, this is going to be a smart person, but they have years and years and years of experience before the SCP makes sense to them. So just some pitfalls there. So anyway, when you get past education with this foundation, you have the capability to adopt secure coding and design, capability to remediate discovered vulnerabilities on a wider scale, champions to drive the secure development culture. A healthy enterprise is just as much about culture as it is about rules and policies. Buy-in for more mature practices and cooperation between security and development. We start getting a healthy relationship between the two. And scoping is something that we can do in parallel with educating our developers and in parallel with more finding and fixing. Program scope and strategic imperative. So, gather the application portfolio. Enterprise leadership must allocate limited resources for tools and assessments, so the security leadership must gather the data to inform those decisions. What are the application's technical and business profiles? What language do they use? How big is it? What frameworks leverage? Also, like, who is it for? Who is it exposed to? This is the time early on we want to gather that information. There's all sorts of reasons we want to do that. Why do we want to consider everything? Remember Target. Target their breach started with a exploit of a obscure PHP portal for contractors. I guarantee you they did not think to apply any security scrutiny to it because their thinking was, well, this is just for the partner portal. Nobody uses this thing, so clearly target.com is far more important. But they failed to account for several things when they made that decision. They didn't account for access to sensitive assets, and they also didn't take into account if it allows elevation of privilege within the enterprise. So they didn't consider all the factors that go into the decision about whether or not they should apply some security scrutiny to this thing before using it in the wild. So if you're gathering your portfolio, just a couple pitfalls is to, well, if you've already got your inventory centrally controlled, that's great, wonderful. You may need to ensure it's complete, but great. Now, of course, a 100% complete list is not always feasible, but the mistake we often see is to get an application list is just going to the different lines of business. Like, hey, your job is to know what all the apps are, give me a list. And what they'll do is they'll just get out a dry erase marker and start like writing down names on a board. What's the problem with that? Sustainability, like you can't, and again, your person is not going to know what that is. If they start doing something like that, like writing down their list of apps on a whiteboard, what that means is they don't have that list stored in soft copy somewhere, and they really should. So you should go forward. So you want to go forward, then backward. So go forward, go to everything that should list your applications, go to the line of business, go to all those guys, but they're not going to give you complete data. What we like to do is then go backward. All right, if we're not sure what accesses the sensitive PII, what we're going to do is we're going to go march over to the guys responsible for the SAN, and I'm going to say, hey, give me a list of everybody who connects to your stuff. And I haven't yet run into situations where those guys did not have a complete list of everybody who accesses their stuff. They know the score, your database admins, the people who monitor, their business-to-business system, the B2B systems, or any other piece of critical infrastructure. Those guys keep lists. Let's lean on those. That's very useful information. From there, scoping. Use an application risk rating framework. The framework should encompass the business function, the technical risk, and the assessment history. Back it with that obscure Target application. It accessed very sensitive data. It had access further into the corporate network, and it was PHP, which by itself should have multiplied the risk score through the roof. Yes?
At the slide, what have you seen as a sustainable method of maintaining that application for it, tool-wise?
I'm not here to shill for products, but here's one. The last time we did one of these reviews, this was a product they used, SD Elements. And what they did was they would actually take the technical profile. You would give it like what it does, who it's for, what kind of data it handles. And one, it's a place where it keeps your inventory. And two, if you like plug it into your change management system, it'll start like creating assessment tracks. Like, and you give it the parameters and it'll say, hey, okay, this application, in case you forgot about it, you should assess it once a year. And then you can put in things like if it detects that you've been updating it a lot, then you can, accelerate further assessments or make it part of the release cycle. Ideally, we want to do both, right? And indeed, the last session was about integrating security into the SDLC, and we want to use continuous integration for our new development. But there's two reasons you want to do full assessments. One, you have legacy that is not part of that continuous integration process, right? Well, three reasons. There's products. You can't do the continuous integration because you don't own it. It's somebody else who built it. If you're dealing with something like SAP, then somebody assesses that. But if it's like a more obscure niche product, you might be the only people who actually care about the security for it. So you might need to lean on assessments for that. In addition, and then finally, there are a level of security tests that really do require manual review. And I'm sure a lot of previous classes in this conference have touched on what those things are. And one thing to do, and we worked with one company that had a solution, like how do I make the decision, what do I fully assess versus what do I rely on continuous integration. And what they would do is that they would run scans, and then what you do is you give them data to create a heat map of what applications justify the closer manual review. And these are people who have to deal with literally thousands of apps. So in your scope, establish your goals. So your goals do need to come from executive leadership, not just security. Otherwise, you're not going to have any kind of compelling mandate. So set those goals. How many apps should your program cover within the next year? Are your apps subject to PCI DSS or other compliance drivers? And how often should you assess your highest risk apps? So these are just some things to consider when you're setting your goals. But with this foundation, you've got your goals. You have the known gap between your policy and practice. And you have a profile of the SDL throughout the organization. And, well, very importantly, you have your portfolio. You are now getting an idea of how big this program is going to have to be. You now have goals to compare those to, because there might be some figuring out that needs to happen if what the executives are willing to provide and how big of a scope your program needs to have. If there's a big disconnect, this is the time to figure that out before you start actually building a roadmap, because otherwise you're building a roadmap that cannot succeed. So anyway, once you have all those together, it is time for your mission. This is the time to consider adopting an SSA framework, such as OpenSAM, Microsoft SDL, BSIM. I'm sure several of these were mentioned during this conference. OpenSAM divides all these activities into 4 business functions with a nice, neat 3 practices each. This is an open model. The Microsoft SDL is very much focused on your change control process, all the different things you can be doing for security in your dev lifecycle. And BSIM is another, it's a sigil-based solution that works very similar to OpenSAM in that it has your 4 areas of practice with 3 practices under each category. So there are different advantages and disadvantages to consider when adopting these things. The important thing is that you need to consider your foundations first. And the important things to consider is that once you have done these foundations, you're going to have a much better idea of what framework is appropriate for you. It's better to do those foundations. You don't need a framework at the very beginning. So again, assign a charter of responsibilities. Who's responsible? Are they capable to succeed? And do they have the resources to succeed? So I'll just make a quick point about metrics since we're running a little bit low on time. This is the most common metric we'll see, like the security leadership give to the executives. Because, hey, I had a lot of vulnerabilities and now I have fewer vulnerabilities. What does this fail to convey? Risk. This does not account for risk, right? There is blindness here. So what you want to do is you can also give metrics that put your overall risk. This is what we will do from time to time. These are the vulnerabilities I know about. If I extrapolate that data onto my entire application portfolio, things I haven't scanned or assessed yet, I'm fixing the stuff, but there is a lot of other things that I need to discover as this program grows. So you want to use metrics like this to communicate the need to executives that this program needs to grow because there is more risk that I still am potentially sitting on. So your roadmap, it's a good idea for your roadmap to just plan out the next year or so. Don't try to make like a 5-year plan yet. Make a year plan. Make sure you can meet that year plan, and then you maybe get a little more sophisticated. So just going to make, let's see. So security leadership does have the biggest role. This is a rather robust list. We don't have time to go over this entire list. This is normally something we talk about over 2 days. I'm sure a lot of these things were covered in the other sessions for this conference. So, but some things that stick out here is, this is pretty obvious: assessing production, vulnerability management, also pretty straightforward. Risk intelligence, we talked about the portfolio. As far as measurement, we talked about that, but also one thing, receiving public fines, make sure you have a solution for that. If somebody finds a vulnerability in the wild, who do they talk to? Make sure you have an answer for that. Let's talk about secure coding and design. I think that we had a discussion earlier about threat modeling and the challenges that come with it. Threat modeling is something you may want to consider getting some practice for early on, because proper threat modeling is very difficult. Data flow diagrams make it easy to start, and you can get a lot of good data at the start, but making a complete threat model is very difficult, because the person who builds it has to be able to think like a developer, an architect, and a network ops person. And there are not a lot of people who can do that. I'm not one of them. Like I'm short on the network ops side of things. So we cannot exclude ops. We can't expect the production team to be application experts, but they should know when to recognize application problems, mitigate vulnerabilities, and escalate to developers as appropriate. We had a 1 o'clock talk just across the hall that was about specifically that, and how they would separate logs that belong to the app developers and logs that belong to them, so that they could detect malicious activity and verify that it actually is malicious and not something intended. You're in trouble. So in conclusion, SSA is a challenge in managing risk and complexity. This is not a simple challenge, but it is a manageable one. Quick early wins are useful short-term and long-term. Get your SSA program goals, scope, and charter in order before taking the big steps. And a proper SSA framework like OpenSAM will be critical to grow, but you can get started without one. And that's the important part. Getting started is the hardest part. That's it. Any questions? I'm going to be providing them to LASCON, so they'll publish it along with the others. Yes? Okay, great. So thank you very much.